The blood on her dress had dried to rust-brown stains, but her eyes still held the wild terror of something hunted. She couldn't be more than 16, crouched behind the water trough like a wounded animal, clutching a bundle to her chest that moved with the soft rhythm of breathing. "Promise you won't tell them," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper in the pre-dawn darkness. Thomas Caldwell had seen plenty in his 43 years ranching this harsh stretch of Arizona territory. Cattle rustlers, claim jumpers, Apache raids that left families scattered to the wind. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of this girl, appearing like a ghost in his barnyard, with desperation carved into every line of her face. He should have said no, should have demanded answers, should have marched her straight to Sheriff Morrison in Copper Falls and let the law sort out whatever trouble had chased her here. Instead, he found himself nodding, tears burning his eyes for reasons he couldn't name. "I promise," he whispered back. The bundle in her arms stirred, and a tiny fist emerged from the worn blanket. A baby, no more than a few months old, with downy hair that caught the moonlight like spun gold. Thomas's ranch sat 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, carved from unforgiving land that had already claimed his wife Sarah to fever 3 winters past. The isolation that had become his curse now felt like providence. Whatever this girl was running from, whatever had put that haunted look in her eyes, she'd found the one place in the territory where secrets could be buried deep as graves. "What's your name?" he asked, extending a calloused hand to help her stand. "Mary," she said, then caught herself. "Mary Smith?" The lie sat heavy between them, but Thomas didn't challenge it. In the West, a person's past belonged to them alone, and he'd learned not to pry into wounds that were nant his to heal. The eastern horizon was beginning to blush pink with dawn's approach. Soon, the sun would rise on whatever decisions they made in these stolen moments of darkness. Thomas looked at the girl, Mary, or whoever she really was, and felt the weight of his promise settling on his shoulders like a yoke. Behind them, the ranch house waited, empty rooms that had echoed with loneliness for too long. Ahead lay dangers he couldn't yet imagine, choices that would test the very core of who he believed himself to be. Thomas led Mary and her baby into the house as the first rays of sunlight painted the desert gold. She moved like someone accustomed to being quiet, her bare feet making no sound on the wooden floors Sarah had once swept clean each morning. "You hungry?" Thomas asked, already knowing the answer from the hollow of her cheeks. While she devoured day-old biscuits and preserves, Thomas studied her in the growing light. Beneath the dirt and fear, she was pretty in the way frontier girls often were, hard and too young, but carrying a stubborn grace. The baby, a boy by the looks of him, had her same dark hair, but eyes that seemed older than they should be. "How long you been running?" Thomas asked gently. Mary's hand stilled on the biscuit. Since he was born." She didn't elaborate, but Thomas saw the bruise on her wrist, finger-shaped and faded yellow, saw how she instinctively shielded the baby when footsteps passed on the porch outside. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. "Who's looking for you, Mary?" "Everyone," she whispered. "The whole territory, maybe. They'll say I stole him, but I didn't. He's mine, my blood," her voice cracked. "But they won't see it that way." Thomas poured coffee with hands that had suddenly grown unsteady. He'd heard whispers in town, talk of a scandal involving one of the territory's most prominent families, a young woman who had disappeared after birthing a child out of wedlock, taking the baby despite having no legal claim. "If this was her, Mary," he said carefully, "what you're asking me to do, harboring, you, keeping quiet, it could cost me everything. My ranch, my standing in the community, maybe my life." She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much. "I know what I'm asking, and I know I got no right to ask it, but if they take him," she pressed her face to the baby's head, "they'll give him to people who'll never love him like I do, people who'll see him as a mistake to be hidden away." Through the window, dust clouds rose in the distance, riders, still miles off but heading their way. Thomas felt his chest tighten with the weight of decision. "There's a root cellar," he heard himself say, "behind the house. Sarah used to store preserves there." Mary's relief was so palpable, it filled the room like sunlight. Outside, the hoofbeats were getting closer. The root cellar was barely 6 feet square, carved from the red earth and reinforced with timber. Thomas had cleared it of Sarah's empty mason jars, leaving only shadows and the smell of turned earth. Mary huddled in the corner with her baby, who seemed to sense the danger and remained unnaturally quiet. "No matter what you hear," Thomas whispered as he lowered the wooden door, "don't make a sound." The riders were close enough now that he could count them. 5 men, riding hard with the purpose of those who had been searching a long time. Thomas recognized the lead rider before they had even reached his fence line. Marcus Whitmore, one of the richest men in the territory, and meaner than a rattlesnake when crossed. Thomas met them in his yard, his own rifle held loose but ready in his hands. "Morning, Whitmore," Thomas called out, keeping his voice steady. "Little early for social calls." Whitmore's horse danced beneath him, sensing its rider's agitation. "Cut the pleasantries, Caldwell. We're looking for someone. A girl, about 16, traveling with a baby. She's wanted for kidnapping." "Haven't seen anyone," Thomas replied. "Been alone here for 3 days straight." One of Whitmore's men, a thin scarecrow named Jessup, spat into the dust. "Mind if we look around? Just to be thorough." It wasn't really a question. Thomas watched as the men dismounted and began searching his property with the methodical efficiency of a military operation. They checked the barn, the outbuildings, even peered into the well. Jessup kicked at loose boards on the porch, testing for hiding spots. "Funny thing," Whitmore said, staying mounted while his men searched. "Tracks lead right to your property line, then seem to disappear." "Desert wind covers a lot of tracks," Thomas said. "Indeed it does." Whitmore's eyes were cold as winter stones. "But not all of them." From where Thomas stood, he could see the slight depression in the earth where the root cellar door sat. To anyone who didn't know it was there, it would look like natural settling. But Jessup was walking that direction, his boots scuffing through the dirt with increasing purpose. Thomas's finger found the trigger of his rifle. "Course," Whitmore continued conversationally, "harboring a kidnapper is a hanging offense in this territory. Federal marshals would be very interested in anyone foolish enough to help her." Jessup stopped directly above the root cellar door. "Find something?" Whitmore called out. Jessup bent down, brushing dirt away with his hand. His fingers traced the edge of the wooden door. Thomas raised his rifle. "Wait!" The voice came from behind Thomas, soft but carrying in the morning air. Mary stood 20 yards away, having emerged from somewhere near the back of the house, her baby cradled against her chest. She walked toward them with the dignity of someone going to her execution. "There's no need for violence," she said quietly. "I'm here." Whitmore's face split into a cold smile of triumph. "Well, well, Miss Doreen Whitmore, or should I say, the woman who stole my grandson?" Thomas felt the world shift beneath his feet. Catherine Whitmore, Marcus Whitmore's own daughter, who had disappeared 6 months ago, in disgrace after refusing to name the father of her unborn child. "I didn't steal anything that wasn't already mine," Catherine said, her chin raised despite the tremor in her voice. "That bastard belongs with decent people," Whitmore snarled. "People who can give him a proper name and a future." "His name is James," Catherine said firmly, "after his grandfather, your father." For a moment, something flickered across Whitmore's face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by stone-cold determination. "Hand him over, Catherine. This foolishness ends now." Instead of moving toward her father, Catherine took a step closer to Thomas. "He promised," she said simply. "This man gave me his word to protect us, and he's kept it even knowing what it might cost him." Thomas looked down at her, this girl who was barely more than a child herself, who'd been brave enough to risk everything for her baby's future. In her face, he saw echoes of Sarah, who died trying to give birth to the child they'd wanted so desperately. "She's under my protection," Thomas said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. Jessup laughed harshly. "1 man against 5, those ain't good odds, Caldwell." "Maybe not," Thomas replied, "but sometimes a man's got to stand for something bigger than odds." Catherine shifted the baby to one arm and placed her free hand on Thomas's sleeve. The gesture was simple, but in it was a trust that hit him harder than any bullet could have. "Thank you," she whispered. Whitmore's hand moved to his gun. "Last chance, Caldwell. Step aside." Thomas's rifle remained steady, aimed at Whitmore's chest, but his eyes found Catherine's, and in them he saw not just gratitude, but the fierce love of a mother foe, or her child. The standoff stretched like a held breath until hoofbeats thundered from the east. Sheriff Morrison rode hard into the yard with 2 deputies flanking him. Drawn by reports of the search party, his weathered face took in the scene, rifles drawn, tensions crackling like lightning before a storm. "Stand down, all of you," Morrison barked, his authority cutting through the morning air. "Whitmore, you know better than to ride onto a man's property armed like this." "That girl stole my grandson," Whitmore snarled, but he didn't raise his weapon toward the sheriff. Morrison dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his gun butt. "From what I hear tell, the girl in question is your own daughter. Hard to steal from your own blood, seems to me." "She's no daughter of mine," Whitmore spat. "Funny thing about blood, Marcus," Morrison said. "Don't matter how hard you try to deny it, it's still blood." Catherine stepped forward, still holding baby James. "Sheriff, I want to make a statement, for the record." What followed was a story that broke Thomas's heart and steeled his resolve in equal measure. Catherine spoke of being 16 and in love with a young ranch hand her father had driven off when he learned of their relationship, of giving birth alone in a line shack, attended only by an old Mexican woman who'd taken pity on her, of her father's plan to take the baby and give it to his brother's family in California, erasing the shame from the Whitmore name. "All I wanted was to keep my son," she finished, tears streaming down her face, "to raise him with love instead of letting him be hidden away like some dirty secret." Sheriff Morrison's expression grew harder with each word. "Marcus, what she's describing sounds an awful lot like kidnapping on your part." "That's ridiculous," Whitmore blustered. "I'm her father. I have rights." "You have the right to disown her if you choose," Morrison interrupted, "but you don't have the right to steal her child. The law's pretty clear on that." The moment stretched taut as a wire. Then, surprisingly, it was Jessup who broke first. "Boss," he said quietly, "maybe we should head back to town. Let the law sort this out proper." One by one, Whitmore's men began backing toward their horses. Whitmore himself sat his saddle for a long moment, staring at his daughter and grandson with an expression Thomas couldn't read. "This ain't over," he said finally. "Yeah," Sheriff Morrison replied mildly. "It is." After the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, Morrison turned to Catherine. "You'll need to come to town with me, miss. File papers to make everything legal. But, far as I can see, there's no crime been committed here, except maybe by your father." Catherine nodded, then turned to Thomas. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks," Thomas said. "Just need to know you and the boy will be all right." "We will be," she said with quiet certainty. "We'll make our own way." Years later, when Thomas was an old man sitting on his porch in the evening light, he would remember that morning as the day he learned what courage really meant. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite the cost. Catherine Whitmore, who took back her maiden name of Catherine Hayes, established a small seamstress shop in Copper Falls and raised James to be a fine young man. On Sundays, they would sometimes ride out to Thomas's ranch for dinner, and he would watch the boy grow strong and straight under his mother's fierce love. In the end, Thomas reflected, some promises were worth more than gold, more than land, more than life itself. Some promises were worth keeping, even when they broke. Your heart to honor them. The desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the eternal truth that in a hard land, the only thing that truly mattered was the courage to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Even when your hands shook with fear, even when tears burned your eyes, especially then. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.